You know, when I tell this story, people either laugh and say I was tired, or they get real quiet, because deep down, they know something like this could happen to anyone. It was the summer after the 2011 tsunami. If you've never been to Ishinomaki, let me paint you a picture. Before the disaster, it was a normal coastal city, lively in its own way. But after the tsunami, it felt like the soul of the place had been washed away. Entire neighborhoods were gone. Streets I used to drive every day. Just piles of rubble and twisted metal. Even months later, the air smelled faintly of salt and mud, like the ocean hadn't let go of the land yet. I was driving a taxi back then. Work was slow, but I kept at it because people still needed rides. And honestly, it gave me something to do besides sit in silence at home. The nights were the hardest. Ishinomaki was quiet, too quiet, and you never knew if it was the grief pressing on your chest or something else. That night, I was waiting near the station when I saw her. A young woman, maybe in her 20s, stepped toward my cab. I noticed right away she was dripping wet. Her hair clung to her face and shoulders, and her clothes looked heavy, like she'd just climbed out of the sea. She opened the back door slowly and sat down without making a sound. I tried to be polite, even though something about her unsettled me. I asked where she wanted to go. She answered in this soft, almost broken voice, "Minamihama." I froze for a second. Minamihama. That part of town was completely destroyed. There was nothing left but ruins and sand. I glanced back at her in the mirror and said, "Are you sure? That area doesn't exist anymore." She didn't look at me, didn't even blink. She just nodded once. I can't explain why, but I started the meter and began driving. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was pity. Or maybe some part of me already knew what she was. As we moved through the city, I kept sneaking glances in the rearview mirror. She sat perfectly still, eyes forward, water dripping onto the seat. The cab felt cold, colder than it had any right to be in the middle of summer. My hands were slick on the steering wheel, not from the heat, but from nerves. The whole time I kept thinking, should I say something? Should I stop the car? The roads got emptier the closer we got to Minamihama. Street lights were gone, power lines still down. Just darkness and the sound of my engine echoing off the broken remains of buildings. I remember passing a spot where kids used to play baseball. Now it was nothing but cracked earth and debris. When I finally pulled into the area, there was nothing to see but open land and the faint outline of foundations where houses once stood. I slowed down, looked into the rearview mirror, and said, "We're here." The seat was empty. She was gone. No door opening, no footsteps, no sound at all. My stomach dropped. I whipped around in my seat, and there was nothing. Just water stains on the fabric where she had been sitting. I sat there for what felt like forever, my heart pounding in my ears. Every instinct told me to get out of that car and run, but my body wouldn't move. Finally, I forced myself to turn off the meter. The number still ticking there on the screen felt wrong, like I'd just charged a ghost. When I got back to the station later, I didn't tell anyone. I thought they'd laugh, or worse, they'd think I'd lost it. But then, little by little, I started hearing whispers from other drivers, stories almost identical to mine. Passengers who looked alive, gave an address, then vanished before the car ever stopped. Some drivers even wrote down the fares under unknown passengers. Researchers from the university came later to interview us. They wanted to know if it was grief, trauma, or something else. I told them exactly what I told you just now. That woman was real. I heard her voice. I saw her in my mirror. And when she disappeared, she left her mark. My seat was wet. And the scariest part? Every single address given by those ghostly passengers belonged to places destroyed by the tsunami. Places where people had died. So when people ask me if I believe in ghosts, I tell them this: I don't just believe. I drove one home. And if you ever find yourself in Ishinomaki late at night, climbing into the back of a taxi, ask yourself, are you the passenger? Or are you the ghost? I don't usually tell this story out loud, because every time I do, people either laugh or look at me like I've lost my mind. But I know what I saw that night, and ever since then, I avoid the last train whenever I can. This was a few years ago, when I lived just outside Tokyo. I worked late shifts, so catching the final train wasn't unusual. But if you've ever been in a Japanese station after midnight, you'll know the feeling. It's not the same as during the day. The crowds are gone, the shops are shut, and the silence feels heavy. The fluorescent lights hum like insects, and even though you might be completely alone, you can't shake the feeling that someone's watching. That night, I rushed through the gates just in time. The train doors closed behind me, and I realized there were only 3 of us inside. A businessman slumped in the corner, already half asleep. A young woman a few rows ahead of me, staring at her phone. And then, me. That was it. At first, everything seemed normal. The rhythm of the tracks, the swaying of the carriage, it almost lulled me into dozing off. But then the lights flickered, just once, long enough to snap me awake. And that's when I heard it. A dragging sound. Slow, steady, like shoes scraping against the floor. At first, I thought the businessman was shifting in his sleep. But when I looked, he hadn't moved. The woman hadn't either. At the far end of the carriage, near the door, I saw him. A man, or something shaped like one. He was hunched over, his clothes filthy and torn. His head hung at an unnatural angle, like his neck had been broken. His skin was pale, almost gray, and his eyes, cloudy, lifeless. He began moving toward us, step by step, drag, scrape, drag, scrape. I wanted to believe he was drunk, just some salaryman who'd had too much to drink. But the longer I watched, the more impossible that became. His lips were blue, his body seemed stiff, every movement jerky and wrong. What chilled me the most was that no one else reacted. The woman kept scrolling on her phone, completely calm. The businessman kept snoring. It was like I was the only one who could see him. I gripped the edge of my seat, staring out the window, pretending not to notice. The train should have stopped by then. We were well past the usual timing for the next station. But outside, it was just tunnel after tunnel. No lights, no announcement from the speakers. Nothing but the endless dark. The footsteps grew louder, closer. His breathing, ragged, wet like he was gasping for air, filled the carriage. By the time he was halfway down, I could see details I wish I hadn't. His hands were discolored, swollen, the way skin looks after being in water too long. His veins bulged along his neck, and every breath he took sounded like a drowning man forcing air through crushed lungs. I told myself not to look again. Don't make eye contact. Don't acknowledge him. But my curiosity got the better of me. I glanced into the rearview mirror above the aisle. He was close now. Too close. And then the lights flickered again. And just like that, he was gone. The train jolted, screeched, and finally slowed. The doors opened, spilling harsh white light into the carriage. The woman stood up and left without looking at me. The businessman woke, yawned, and shuffled off as if nothing was strange. I stood, legs shaking, and stepped onto the platform. That's when I looked up at the station sign. It said, Kisaragi. I froze. I'd ridden this line countless times, memorized every stop. There is no Kisaragi station. I'd never even heard the name before. The platform was deserted. No staff, no passengers, not even vending machines humming in the background. Just silence. Heavy, absolute silence. And then, it all goes blank. I don't remember how I got home. One moment I was staring at that strange sign, and the next thing I knew, I was waking up in my apartment, clothes still on, heart racing like I'd run a marathon. The next morning, I searched everywhere. Maps, timetables, online forums, nothing. Kisaragi Station doesn't exist, at least not officially. But when I looked deeper, I found others. Other stories. People who claimed they'd ended up at the same place after taking the wrong train at the wrong time. Some never made it back. Since that night, I've never looked at the last train the same way. Because sometimes, late at night, when the carriage is almost empty and the lights flicker, I hear it again. That slow, dragging scrape moving closer. And I wonder, what would have happened if he had reached me? I'll never forget that night. Even now, years later, my heart still races when I think about it. It was late, past midnight, and I had stayed late at work. The streets near my apartment were empty, the kind of quiet that makes every sound echo. I usually take a bus, but it had stopped running, so I decided to walk home. It was only about 20 minutes, so I thought it'd be fine. I was wrong. At first, everything seemed normal. The streetlights flickered faintly, the soft hum of distant traffic in the distance. I had my headphones in, listening to music to keep myself company. But after a few minutes, I noticed something. A sound behind me. Not loud, but deliberate. Footsteps. Slow, measured. I stopped walking, paused my music, listened. The footsteps stopped too. My chest tightened. I told myself it was just someone else walking late at night. I started moving again, quicker this time. The footsteps returned. Closer. Matching my pace, I ducked into a small convenience store to grab a bottle of water. I glanced outside the glass doors, hoping it was just another late-night wanderer. But the street was empty. Nothing. I laughed nervously to myself, shaking my head. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe I'd just stayed too late at work. I stepped back onto the street, trying to act casual. That's when I saw him. A shadow at the edge of the street, half hidden behind a parked car. I couldn't see his face clearly. Just a figure. Tall, moving slowly. My stomach dropped. The hair on my arms stood up. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, but I couldn't ignore the fact that every time I took a turn, the shadow mirrored me. Every time I sped up, so did he. I pulled out my phone, pretending to call someone, anything, and the footsteps behind me quickened for a second. I thought maybe he'd run off, but when I looked back, nothing. Just the faint glow of streetlights and the empty asphalt. I started running, heart pounding. Every street corner felt longer than the last. I could hear the faint rustle behind me, clothes brushing against the wind, footsteps chasing mine. My apartment was just ahead. I could see the lights from the windows across the street. Almost there. I reached the entrance of my building and ran inside, slamming the door behind me. I leaned against it, gasping for air, convinced I was safe. And then I heard it. A soft knock on the glass door. I froze. My apartment was on the ground floor. The street outside was empty. I peeked through the curtains, and there he was, standing across the street, motionless, head tilted slightly, just watching me. Not moving, not calling out, just waiting. I never saw his face clearly, but something about him, something in the way he moved, felt wrong. Human, but not quite human. After that night, I started leaving work earlier, taking taxis, anything to avoid walking home alone. I reported it to the police, but there were no witnesses, no footage, nothing. I don't know who he was, and I don't know if he's still out there. But sometimes late at night, when I'm walking down a quiet street, I can feel someone behind me, matching my pace, watching me, waiting for the right moment. And I don't ever stop moving.